So I think the thing is with dyslexia is we view it through such a narrow guise, and that just doesn't help us. So we think of dyslexia as being to do with kids, being to do with reading, and to do with spelling. Now, it is all of those things, but it's also so much more than that. So to better understand what it actually is, what it actually looks like, dyslexic people process information through their brain differently. They use different areas of their brain to process information.
And welcome back to Care So Much. I am so excited for today's guest. Her name is Natalie Brooks, and we are talking about dyslexia today. She is the founder of Dyslexia in Adults. Without further ado, Natalie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you care so much about dyslexia?
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. Well, the honest answer is that I have it myself, and that I am very, very aware of the reality of living with dyslexia. A little bit on why adults, because I guess that's the slightly different thing that I focus on. I was incredibly lucky and was able to get a lot of support as a child. So I understood the value of support with dyslexia. I know what it gives us, why it's important, and it just generally drops off a cliff with adults. And I decided that annoyed me. So instead of just sitting there being annoyed, which is what I was for a few years, I decided to do something about it. And now this is my little world. I've run a membership for adults that they can join to get advice and support on their dyslexia.
I feel like dyslexia is one of those things that people are aware of, but they don't know a lot about, and there's a lot of misconceptions about. And that is particularly relevant to my life because I found out as an adult that as a child, they believed I had dyslexia. And I knew that I had trouble reading, and I knew that I had gotten extra help for that in school, but it had never really been explained to me why. It just was struggling reading. As an adult, I've learned a lot more about dyslexia, and I've realized that there's a lot more to it than that. And I'm really curious about how you describe dyslexia to somebody who just has that general idea of what dyslexia is and what some of those misconceptions are.
Firstly, I think, unfortunately, your story is actually really common. A lot of people aren't given the label of dyslexia because they think that by telling them that they'll be defined by it, or that it will somehow impact them and think that they're kind of less than somehow. My personal belief, and I'm not saying that that doesn't sometimes happen, but for me personally, and what I hear so often is that when you have the label of dyslexia, it helps you understand yourself. It helps you understand that what you're struggling with, what you're good at, what you might need for help, and why these struggles are occurring, and that you are so much more than stupid, because it can sometimes feel like you're a little stupid. You aren't, but it can feel that way sometimes. So I think the label, for me personally, is really important. That's my viewpoint on it.
So I think the thing is with dyslexia is we view it through such a narrow guise, and that just doesn't help us. So we think of dyslexia as being to do with kids, being to do with reading, and to do with spelling. Now, it is all of those things, but it's also so much more than that. So to better understand what it actually is, what it actually looks like, dyslexic people process information through their brain differently. They use different areas of their brain to process information. And one example of that we've seen on MRI scans is that the parts of the brain that light up when dyslexic people are reading and non-dyslexic people are reading is that they use completely different parts of the brain. Now, when we say to ourselves, okay, so this person's brain is literally wired differently, you're like, okay, that makes a lot of sense as to why things have such a broad impact and how things can have so much of an impact. But when we're just thinking, oh, that person's dyslexic, they can't read and they struggle to spell, that's when that difference comes into place and it's confusing to understand. The other really important thing when we think about dyslexic people seeing information differently and processing information differently is it comes with loads of challenges, and those challenges can be really frustrating and can sometimes make us feel a little stupid even though we're not. What is important to also understand is that when we're processing information differently, it means we think differently. And that's one of the crucial strengths that comes with dyslexia. And again, when we look through that like really like specific way of viewing dyslexia, we're not making room for the fact that dyslexic people have opportunities that they can bring to friendships, workplaces, family. And I think that's a better way to understand it. If you understand it as the way we are using different parts of our brain to process information, you're like, oh, okay, this is why this is such a big deal to everyone. Anyway, that is 100% the smartest I'm going to sound all day. So hopefully that made a lot of sense.
It's really funny to me because, like I said, I have this personal experience. I'm like 99% sure I have dyslexia because I've learned enough about those things that like wouldn't fall into that category of specifically spelling and reading, which is something I've always struggled with, that I've like learned about. And I'm like, that's because I'm dyslexic. It would have been so nice to know that. It's like some of these struggles that you're talking about in that different way that brains process things. But we're definitely going to talk about the strengths. We're definitely going to be talking about some of those other things. I'd love to kind of start off with what some of those like areas that are outside of that, just like you struggle to read or spelling is hard.
Different parts of dyslexia are going to show up depending on what your job is. But I think a common one that is pretty universal that maybe is just not as well known with dyslexia is the ability to process like audio information. The one thing that like maybe if you know a little bit more about dyslexia, you might be like, oh, they prefer if they aren't given pieces of information written. And although that is true, we're fun and complex human beings and it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So dyslexic people often really struggle with verbal instructions. So if you've ever been given directions and someone has gone, oh, so if you just go to the end of the road, then you take the second left and then at the lamppost, if you just need to go continue on, follow around the road, then on the third right, you can just take the road right round and then you'll see it. And you're like, tumbleweed. I remember something about a second left at a lamppost at some point. That is exactly what we're talking about. So, getting the opportunity to sound smart for another hot second. So it's this fancy term called working memory, which is just really, really complicated way of saying dyslexic people struggle with verbal information. And so basically the way to think about it is that our brains are a dining room table and we can only hold so much food on our dining room table. Now, dyslexic people's dining room table is just a little bit smaller. So our dining room table can only take a starter and a main course and it ain't going to hack dessert as well. Like at dessert, we're just like, I'm out. I can't hold any more information. So what our brains want to do is they are desperately with working memory is they're trying to do something with that information. So they're trying to move it into a long-term memory or connect it with something or ask a question. And so one of the common things dyslexic people do is they write it down really, really quickly. They get a piece of information like, hang on, I need to write it down. Otherwise I'm going to forget. Hang on. And that's just basically our working memory just screaming at us going, are you freaking kidding me? I can't hold this much information. I've got dessert. I've got main course and you're asking for side plates and and starters. It's too much. And that's a common thing that I think a lot of people who are dyslexic struggle with, and neurodiverse people generally, it's also something that's associated with ADHD that maybe is just a little less known that I think can help. And just to, because I feel bad if I ever explain a challenge and ever explain how to help yourself. If you're listening to this ferociously nodding and thinking like, damn, this girl is inside my head. Well, thank you. It seems like a nice place to be. What I recommend is, we hear this a lot with dyslexic people, is we love multisensory learning. Super smart term, basically means doing lots of things at the same time to kind of get things into our brain. So generally, the ideal scenario for everyone, not just dyslexic people, but it extra helpful for dyslexic people and neurodiverse ADHD people, is you want to explain something and say, okay, I'm going to give you all of this information. I'm going to just like help you learn it and understand it. And then I'm going to follow up with the same information in a written format so that you kind of take the time, have the opportunity to listen, understand what I'm saying, connect with the information, but you're not stressed about remembering everything. And then afterwards, you can follow up, reread the information, and just make sure it goes in that one level deeper.
It's so funny that you say that, because you just experienced this. I literally tell all of my guests when they're on this podcast that I'm going to take notes while they're talking because of that. And I did not know that was a dyslexia thing.
Consider me like some kind of like public education system.
And it's exactly that thing where it's like, my notes are wild. I'm notorious for like my notes not being things that other people can read, but it's really just like essentially my reminder that I put the dessert in the kitchen. Like that's like, it's just a little thing to trigger for me what it was that I wanted to talk about. I know you mentioned this a little bit when you talked about who you are, what your experience as a child with dyslexia was.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it was a long time ago. I'm old, unfortunately. So, this is like my view of it kind of a long time back. So
for sure,
I think that's always like, the way we look at things and with hindsight is always different. But I think what you have to understand about me is my mum's a powerhouse. Like there's no messing with my mum. And I'm an only child, so there was nowhere to kind of go with her, like, amazingness other than just to pour it into me. So she started kind of way before you would learn to read, she started putting Post-its everywhere, and she'd be like, Natalie, go to the chair. And I would like toddle to a chair and, go to the colour blue, and I would toddle over there. And, she had these kind of fairly intellectual, for people on the podcast, I'm going in air quotes here, conversations with me as like a 3-4-year-old. And I don't know whether or not it was my mum or actually this is the truth. She believed I was smart. And then I went to school and everything went to pot. I didn't really learn to read and write properly until I was about 10. And so basically the teachers were like, oh, Natalie's really struggling. And my mum was like, I'm really confused because she's a good kid. She's smart. She's capable. And there was this real disconnect between what I was capable of in some areas and what I was not capable in others. And luckily, between my mum being like, I'm not standing for this, and the teachers having some knowledge, they picked up dyslexia very early, which I'm incredibly lucky with. So I was 7 when I was diagnosed. And then basically my mum went to school and she was like, cool, well, now we know, we're going to obviously figure it out. Like, what are we going to do? And they were like, oh, nothing. And that was like red rag to a bull to my mum. She was like, that's a hard pass for me. So she whipped me out of that school mid-year, put me into another school that was specialised with dyslexia, which is not like the norm in the UK. I'm really lucky. Now, listen, it was not plain sailing. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I was not, just like sorted from there on out. But I understood how to educate myself, how to figure this stuff out, how to get through the challenges. And that puts me head and shoulders above everyone else. And for that, I am incredibly, incredibly lucky.
One of the big similarities that I would say you and I have in this is that my parents were also super convinced that I'm smart. And it's because I'm so smart that it would be impossible to miss. No, but I think there is something that I will be forever grateful for is having parents who not only knew that I was smart, but advocated for me. And I had lots of people who thought maybe I was just dumb, but I never even for a second believed them because I had been told with absolute certainty, you're smart, you just struggle to read. Like that was what I was told by my parents. My school did have some services, but it was like once a week I went and had an hour with somebody who taught me how to read better. When I was going into middle school, I was told I was going to have to be held back in certain classes and wouldn't be able to take some of the advanced classes I wanted to take. So I did 3 days a week. I went for 2 hours after school and did additional education. And that's really where I learned to catch up. And I also learned the lesson that I learned that I don't know if it's the right lesson or not. I was smart enough where I could do it. I just had to work way harder than everybody else.
Very common reality for dyslexic people. And I think, all joking aside, it's uncomfortable when you're talking about yourself, but actually when we try and diagnose dyslexia, we look for something called a spiky profile, which sounds really fancy, but again, it's really simple, which basically means you're really, really capable at some things and you're really, really struggling at others. And it's that disparity between one thing up here, you might be in the 99th percentile for, you know, being able to, like, spatial awareness, or being able to understand problems, or being able to kind of like comprehend things, or you might be way up here. And then like reading, spelling, verbal instructions, all of that kind of stuff, you're down here. And it's that disparity that makes us know it's dyslexia. So, you know, as uncomfortable as it is to kind of be like, oh, like, I think I'm smart. Actually, that is what makes us know that we're dyslexic and not stupid, in air quotes, because I mean, stupid is not really a term we should be using anymore.
Well, and it's just, I don't know. I've always had the attitude of like different people are good at different things. And if you give humans enough options, they're going to be something that they're good at. And we just have this bizarrely narrow field that we judge people in, and have decided that all human beings need to be in this super narrow field in order to be intelligent. After you were done in that school and you were going out into the world,
I felt like school wasn't easy, but I understood how to educate myself. I understood where I had to maybe put a little bit more effort in, like you talked about, where I had to kind of navigate certain things. So I felt like I figured that side of things out. And one weird thing about me is that I'm a secret politics nerd, and I wanted to be an MP when I was younger because apparently I'm strange. And so I did politics at A level, which is our like higher type of education in England. And then I also went to university, and I also studied politics there because, like I said, I'm strange. And then over the summer, while I was at university, I would also work at Westminster to try and like figure out, you know, how to do this whole being an MP thing. And I basically decided privately, quietly, just between me and myself. I didn't tell my parents this. I didn't tell my friends this. This was not a conversation of like, can I do this? I decided I couldn't, because the thing with politics is that from afar, I was like, well, I'm going to have to read briefing documents, and I'm going to have to understand like complex laws, and I'm going to have to read research and all of these things. And there's this thing in the UK where basically, it's called a red box, and it's basically, senior, members of the cabinet get given this red box overnight that has loads of information. They're supposed to read it and like just make decisions on it every night. Dyslexia often comes with a lot of tiredness, and I'm not a great evening worker. So I read about this, and I read about like MPs that don't read their boxes properly, and they get like told off in the press and stuff like that. And I was like, they'll know that I'm slow. They'll know that I can't read my boxes. In this dream world that I was making it to the cabinet, just like they'll just put that to one side. And I just thought, I'll fail. I'll just be bad. And I privately decided that, and I gave up on what had been a dream since I was about 5. Had actively told people I wanted to be an MP, had been working towards this. That was what I thought I was going to do. And I basically just became intimidated by my dyslexic challenges and gave up, and toddled along for another, a few years, doing different jobs, working in sales. And this, I'm dyslexic, just kept on like rearing its head. And like I said, it was never something I said to people. I never said, oh, I can't apply for a grad scheme because I'm dyslexic, or I can't work there because I'm dyslexic, or I can't do that job because I'm dyslexic. It was just this quiet, like, maneuvering that I would do. And it was just one of those things that I started to feel the weight of, and people would be like, no, what's the whole, like, going, like, not being an MP? Like, this is your dream. Like, you'd be an amazing MP. Or they would say like, oh, Nat, do you want to like do this or do that? And I'd be like, oh, I can't drive. And they would be like, well, why haven't you learned to drive? And I'd be like, the reason. But I knew the reason. And there was just, the list of things were piling and piling and piling. Eventually, it's a combination of things. I felt really frustrated with the way dyslexia was being discussed. There's a lot of things that I feel a little bit irked by. I also didn't know how to help myself, and that was becoming more and more of a problem. I didn't know how to handle adult dyslexia, and I knew that I could handle it as a kid. So I was like, there must be a way. I just don't know what it is. And then finally I was getting a bit pissed off with this whole, I can't. I'm going to say luckily, and this is an odd phrasing when you hear the rest of the sentence. Luckily, a boss of mine said to me, are you lazy or are you stupid? Or maybe both. And that was the meanest thing someone could have said to me. And it gave me the most almighty kick up the arse. And 3 years ago, last week, I created a little Instagram account called Dyslexia in Adults. And that's basically the story, the long and the short of it.
The idea of having a voice in your head that you don't say out loud, but you use to convince yourself that you can't do something because you just think that you can't. I didn't have the word dyslexia. And this is where I think you talked about this with the labels. I do know that I think the reason that I wasn't told they thought I had dyslexia was because they didn't want me to think I was dumb. I never thought I was dumb, but I did have this weird thing that I was always telling people I really struggled with reading. And what it really did was just not give me the language to be able to talk about that. And I understand that that's not an easy choice and they had to make a choice. But I, as an adult, didn't say I can't do this because I have dyslexia. As an adult, what I said to myself is well, that's too much reading and you're never going to have enough time to do that much reading. I just needed more time to be able to do that much reading. And there were lots of things like that. I also didn't think that I could write things. I'm a marketer. My day job is marketing. I wanted to do that, but I didn't think I could be a copywriter because I didn't think that I could write. I didn't think my job could be writing, but all the kinds of marketing I wanted to do required you to do writing. You can't do the jobs I do without writing. I've had bosses who said to me things essentially, are you willfully messing this up?
Oh, yeah.
Are people with dyslexia trying to mess up?
I don't think we could try that artfully. When real life stories and they're oh, you couldn't make that up. I don't think that you could be as successful at low-key mishaps as I am purposefully. Do you know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. There's a story here that I really love to tell that I think best articulates this. My worst dyslexic mistake was unfortunately 6 months after I gave up my little dream of being a politician. So it stung really hard because I'd given up and I'd been okay, I need to figure something else out. And while I was figuring something else out, I just took this data entry job for reasons I really just do not quite understand. Because if anyone understands anything about dyslexia, it's that is red neon flashing, do not take this job. I don't like to tell people I tell people dyslexics can do everything. I don't know if they could do this job. So I was all day, every day, entering hundreds of lines of numbers. So it'd be 50p, 55p, 75p, 35p, that was the job all day, every day, hours a day. And if anyone that doesn't understand dyslexia, one thing that's really challenging for us is sequences. So we really hate sequences. So for example, if something's coming in at 35p, it's really easy for me to put it in as £35. And I swear to you, I think it's right. I look at it. Mm-hmm. Dyslexia was originally called word blindness because when we look at something, we swear down it's correct. And it's obviously wildly not. So anyway, I was doing this job for months and the boss was pretty lenient with me. He was please try a little harder, please try and do a bit better. And I was yeah, in my head thinking, no, this is the best it's gonna get. I need to find a new job ASAP. And one Friday afternoon, they shouted over to me, we got this sales price for this important route. Could you put in the price? And I was yeah, sure. And it was £5, but I put it in as 50p. Now, there was no check on this system. It just whatever I put in was what goes. And then they put the margin on top, and then it went out for the weekend on their sale price. So this is a whole weekend, major brew on sale, being pushed across all our networks of social media and stuff. And it was obviously phenomenally cheap. Like, it was not only just the sale price was cheap, but it was also the sale price was put in wrong. So I came in on Monday morning and it was all like very sullen faces. And my boss was like, so Natalie, if we could just go and have a quick chat in this little room. I was like, ooh, that doesn't seem good. Don't like the little room, not my friend. And he was like, so unfortunately, a price you put in over the weekends actually ended up costing the company over £5,000. Yeah. Bad, really bad. And like, obviously the conversation is going down the road of like, I'm getting fired, which, you know, I'm a big dyslexic advocate, but even I can have some sympathy with the fact that I'm getting fired. Like, fine. Reasonable, I suppose. Something took over my body. I think it was a real sense that like, there was really nothing to lose at this point. I was like, you know, fair enough, that's okay, I understand, whatever. I just would like to say that although I totally accept responsibility of the situation, I just would like to point out that you have a system where a 21-year-old girl comes in every day and does 8 hours a day of entering numbers in the 21st century. I mean, I'm old, but like, come on. And you don't have any checks. And although I have made like a number of mistakes, I do think that maybe there should be some like a review of the system, because this is just setting people up to fail. I actually have been doing some like, I've been looking at this a little bit and like thinking this is just a bit mental. And this is the solution I was actually going to pitch to you. It's not quite finished, but you know, this is what I think would work. This is how I think we could do it. This is the time it would take. This is the tech work it would take. I pitched this to him and he was like, wow, this is actually a really good idea and like makes a lot of sense. Why don't you project manage it? Like, you know it so well. Why don't you project manage it? So I actually, like, just like the hair's whisker, didn't get fired. Actually ended up getting promoted because I was doing this like project management task. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is like, of course I didn't want to make that mistake. Of course I was mortified by that. But if you judge dyslexic people by what they can't do, you're really missing out, because what I could do is look at a whole system, see the problem and see the solution and figure out how to get there. What my job is helping dyslexic people themselves. There's a lot of people doing amazing work helping society create that change. But what I'm really passionate is about dyslexic people themselves going, I don't want to be judged by my lowest ebb. I don't feel like I am just that challenge that I have. I am so much more. And let's figure out what the so much more is.
Upsettingly relatable to me. You said most embarrassing or like most traumatic dyslexic story, and my brain just immediately remembered. Okay, I think this is funny. I think because it's a funny story.
I personally think mine's funny too.
I just did an episode on comedy and advocacy. And in that episode, we talked about how important it is to laugh about things that seem serious. So I just want everyone to know you absolutely can laugh. This is the funniest story I have. I did not find it funny at the time. I found it deeply traumatic at the time. But when I was like 15, 16, I was in high school. I had a presentation that I had to do. We had to write a paper and then do a passage analysis presentation. A couple of things there. One, it was before I learned how to give presentations well. So we were supposed to read our essay. So that's what I did. So it's my actual nightmare. I'm standing in front of a class reading a paper I wrote, the passage in slides up behind me, including like highlighting different chunks as I go through. Like that's, so here's the thing. I typed the passage up very quickly, looking at the book and then just typing it in really quickly and then doing what I always did at the time, which was, oh, look, all the red squiggly lines. I misspelled literally every single word. Let me just pick the first of the spell checks because it's probably close enough. The word general was not spelled correctly.
Oh, no.
Instead, it was the word genital. And I was in front of a class of a bunch of 15 and 16-year-olds who all noticed like while I was reading this. Now, luckily I had a teacher who was super understanding, and she called me back at the end and she goes, "Hey, I want you to know, I know you didn't do this on purpose. You're not in trouble, but they all know. So I need you to know." It just was, it was exactly that example of like, I had stared at that word. I had like made a presentation. I highlighted that word at one point, like, but I didn't see it at all. But there was always this idea that I was doing it because I was careless and not because I couldn't see it. Promise we're going to go into the strengths. I'm kind of saving it as our like little cookie for the end. One of the things that you mentioned there is the idea that regardless of whether or not you have dyslexia, the system and the position that you were in to enter data and be a 21-year-old who entering data can cost a company $5,000 in 2 days is unacceptable. 5,000 pounds, sorry, is unacceptable. And that inherently a system where dyslexic people who work really hard are still going to be set up to fail is also set up to fail for anybody who's in that system, and that situations that help people with dyslexia could help anyone.
I mean, yes, that's basically the understood orthodoxy that basically an environment that suits the dyslexic person is the best environment for everyone. It's just that it levels us up, like what we're able to achieve in those circumstances. Everyone else can like navigate through other circumstances, but we just needed a little bit more than everyone else is kind of the best way to think about it. And I think kind of you touched again on that label of like, you know, in that moment, for me, my dyslexia is a coat of armor. It's this opportunity when something happens and it's really bad and I feel really shitty, I can just wrap myself in this coat of armor of like, I'm not stupid, I'm dyslexic. And although it's frustrating as hell in those moments where you're just like, oh, I really want the world to just swallow me up right now. When you can say to yourself, okay, this sucks, but I am dyslexic and there is a reason why. It just, for me, has been so helpful. I have struggled so much with confidence and believing in myself and all of that. And I so viscerally believe that if I hadn't had that understanding, it would have been 20 times worse. So for me, although I was saying, you know, I can't do that, I'm dyslexic, actually, it was also my savior as well. It's a really, we were talking about this in my community just before this call, actually, how it's completely logical in our brains that we feel completely stupid and completely capable all at the same time, and how they run so simultaneously together. And it's a very strange situation to explain if someone isn't like in our brains as well. But I think that's a very common experience. So that's my personal feeling with the label, is that it was like this coat of armor that protected me when I was at my like lowest moments, to help me understand that I was more than that moment.
The idea of like, I have strengths, I'm like really good at this thing, while simultaneously feeling like, I think there's so many things beyond even just dyslexia that we treat like a moral failing. We do this thing, and when I say we, I mean society. We do this thing where we treat like, we do it with weight, we do it with income, we do it with cleanliness, like having a clean house. That's not something you're doing for yourself because it's nice or because you deserve to live somewhere that's clean and well taken care of. You're doing it because if having a messy, not just like hygienically clean, messy house means that you are somehow have morally failed. And I think there's a lot of similarities that I see with that in this. There's an additional layer of criticism when somebody is saying what you said, which is like, are you dumb or do you not care? Which is either of those are them also saying, whatever it is, for making this mistake, you're a bad person.
100%. And what I think kills me the most is the sad reality, the absolute juxtaposition between how much dyslexic people care and how much they get accused of being lazy and careless. The reality is that as a group of people, we are synonymous with hard work, determination, resilience, really caring, like really wanting to do a good job, more than we are ever usually able to express. Privately, quietly, putting in hour upon hour of extra work without telling anyone. We're not looking at it for glory, because we don't want people to know we're working at all those extra hours. So we're just quietly, privately beavering away to do the best we can because we really care, and we're not even getting the praise for it. And you know what just is like the extra kick in the arse is that then after all of that, we're called lazy. And it's like, wow, what a unbelievably vicious thing to say to someone who is quite literally the archetypal opposite of lazy. It grinds my gears a lot, which you can probably tell, because it's so sad that it's so far from the truth. It's in fact the exact opposite.
That's so incredibly true. Like, that's just, I don't want anybody to know how hard I'm working on certain things. I'm like, listen, I read that 14 times and I'm still pretty sure there's a typo in there somewhere. Like, something in there is off and I can't find what it is, and it's just going to go out the way it is.
And the amount of times that dyslexic people would rather think that we looked at it twice and we're like, oh shit, I didn't notice it, than be like, actually, I woke up at 6 a.m. this morning because I wanted to double check it just one more time before I had the presentation. And then now you're accusing me of being lazy. Great. Yeah. It's a real kicker.
And now having like flashbacks of like, and then this conversation was that and this conversation. So I'm curious about how you would recommend, since your work focuses on adults, and I think it's also something I'm secretly using your expertise right now for myself. But like, so in work situations, I have sometimes I told one boss fairly early on in my career that I had dyslexia, and she wasn't nice about it. And I'm like, I had not really known how to communicate that. That wasn't something, because I hadn't had the language prior to that, it wasn't something that I was used to communicating to people. So I found other ways of like dancing around it instead of telling people. But I'm wondering what you sort of recommend in terms of people who are either in their work or in other spaces in their lives, how to communicate to someone that they have dyslexia, or what you do recommend they communicate.
Yeah, I have to say this is probably my most asked question. And so therefore I actually created an online course to answer this question, because it is actually, I think, a really important topic that's got a lot of information around like the individual and how the individual answers this. But I'm going to do like a tightened version, and if anyone does actually want loads and loads of like helpful resources on this, check out my Instagram page and you'll find it there. It's called Dyslexia Playbook.
We'll put a link in the description as well.
It's not a sales thing, it's just that I actually have so much information that I could do a whole podcast on this, and I want people to get the best answer possible. So that's why I was like, there's a hell of a lot of answers to this question. But I think there's two things here. The first one is, I firmly believe if you don't want to say you're dyslexic, then you shouldn't. If you don't feel comfortable, if you have a lot of like trauma around your experience with dyslexia, if you're really embarrassed about being dyslexic, if you don't feel clear on how to help yourself and what the strengths are, maybe this is not your time to have this conversation. If you're not in the best frame with it all, if you feel really scared about being judged and all of that, then my personal opinion is maybe don't. But what I'm saying that for is because I think it's such a personal decision, and you have to, and I just think it's important that people can ask for the help they need without using the word. You can say, I'm naturally not that capable at this. Would it be possible if I could have this extra piece of support? Or I'm naturally more capable at this. These are the things that I'm good at. Would it be possible if we could do it this way? You haven't said you're dyslexic there, but you've also got the thing that you need, which is help. So that's kind of like one of the answers that I have. The other answers, if you do want to say, now I personally do want to say, I personally advocate for people to say, I think that they should, if the criteria is right. And I talk about the criteria in the course. And so what I think is if you do want to say it, you can say it, you feel comfortable about saying it, I definitely think you should. And basically what I explain is that I think there's kind of like a couple of key steps to it. And you want to start by explaining dyslexia, because if you say to someone they're dyslexic, I'm dyslexic, they're going to think you're a kid, like, or they're going to be like, oh, my, like, nephew's just been diagnosed. And you're like, brilliant, fantastic, not helpful. Or they'll be like, so how do we help? And you're like, so I think it's important to explain dyslexia. I think it's then important to say like, hey, listen, I got this. I'm really capable. I'm really smart. And I walk through on how to do all of this, but I'm giving you the Cliff Notes version. Hey, listen, I just want to let you know I'm really capable. Here's just a couple of things that I would find really valuable. And if you give specific examples, I think that can really help, because when you give specific examples, it feels less scary. If you say, oh, I'm dyslexic and I'd really like some help, it's like, what does help mean? What does that look like? What are you asking for? Like, are you asking for me to like write all your emails for you? No, obviously that's not what I'm asking. So if you just give really tangible, specific answers, then it helps them come to terms and feel at ease with like, oh, okay, that's actually not an unreasonable accommodation. Like, yes, of course we can handle that. And then the last most important piece, please, if you only listen to one thing that I have said the entire podcast, just throw the rest out and listen to this. If you do not explain to them that you have strengths, whether or not we're using the dyslexic word or not, they will not know. They will not know. And they will only focus on the things you're struggling with. So if you want them to see you as more, it is your job to understand what they are in you and help other people understand what they are in us. We are inherently selfish human beings. Maybe you have a one-in-a-lifetime boss that will take the time to figure it out. Most won't. So do yourself a favor, figure out what you're good at, and advocate for that. In a way, you don't have to be like, oh my God, I'm the best, and this is why I'm the best. But you do have to be like, hey, here's some things that come with dyslexic strengths. And then my final piece, just to wrap that all in a bit ribbon and a bow and make it all sound super smart, is if you've done all of that, if you've explained dyslexia in the way that I've discussed and you've gone through everything I've said and you've followed my advice to the letter because I'm super smart, and they've still judged you and they've still been horrible to you and they've still been rude to you, I want you to see that as their problem, as a statement on them. I want you to say, that is unacceptable that they have spoken to me like that. It is unacceptable that they have done that. It is unacceptable that I have been put in this situation, just like we talked about with my job, where I was put in a situation that I was inevitably going to fail at. And I need you to see it as a them problem, because it is a them problem. Because there's another world, there's another universe, there is another set of circumstances where you did every single thing that I just said, and someone met you with kindness and flexibility, and they treated you with respect. And so therefore that is why it's a them problem, not a you problem. End scene.
That is the two things that I do. I either I have this thing that I do where I talk about it as if obviously everybody would want to do this. So like I said, I write social media copy as part of my job. Lots of times I'm posting to audiences of 20,000 people. I just always tell people, I'm like, hey, the ideal structure is 3 people review any marketing materials before they go out. We need a minimum of 1. And it's really just because I'm probably going to make more mistakes than the average person, but the average person isn't perfect, and pretending that they are is wild. I will also be more careful about my writing than the average person and make about the same number of mistakes, if not more. The thing that you said right there at the end, what a minimal ask that you want flexibility, kindness, and respect. What a small bare minimum of a human being we're asking for. In so many situations, like with dyslexia, I think it's the same thing when I talk to friends with ADHD or hear people with autism talk, or in situations where somebody has other mental or physical disabilities. There's lots of other things. We put so much of the work of figuring out how to navigate the world on a person already struggling with certain things and like already having these difficulties. So while obviously I'm hoping and imagining that many of the people listening to this have some level of connection to dyslexia, for someone who maybe doesn't and is in the position where they either have an employee they know have dyslexia or they know someone else in some other way that has dyslexia, what are some basic things that would be helpful to as a good response to somebody disclosing that to them?
Basically, this is the kind of two pillars that I often talk about when I'm trying to, at a very top level, help people understand how to navigate dyslexia. Because like when we're in the weeds, I could give you specific, if we were like your job, I could give you specifics. But when we're talking loads of different jobs, loads of different challenges, loads of different levels of like, experience and all of that, what I always say is that if you have flexibility and kindness at the center of like the environment of your job, most people will end up being successful, and particularly dyslexic people. So I think in the circumstances where someone is directly telling you, kindness is like the lead here. They're like, I think we've talked about it quite articulately, is how the reality is that it's a very emotional experience being dyslexic. It's very frustrating. It's very embarrassing. It's very irritating sometimes. And so we do, when we're met with kindness, firstly, it's rare, like, unfortunately. So it's just so valuable, because also if you're stressed, if you are like, oh my God, I'm going to make another mistake, that's just like the highest likelihood that you are going to make another mistake. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So kindness, I think, is really important. And then just to put a bit of color on flexibility, I think when I'm talking about that, it's like, maybe you amend a system a little bit. Maybe you don't just give someone verbal instructions. Maybe you give someone a second screen or give them a document beforehand to be able to read it. Just, it doesn't always have to be a grand change. It's just like in little moments being like, do we have to do it that way? Or actually, is it really not a big deal if we do it another way? And exactly like we've touched on a couple of times, what is working for dyslexic people is so often best practice. So, you're saying, okay, I'm more likely to make mistakes than maybe like a quote unquote normal person. But what is still best practice is one other person checking it. So this is something that should be available to be flexible about, is like, yes, I really need this, but also, yes, you should have it anyway. So that's a kind of a little bit of color around flexibility of what I recommend. I mean, I have a shed load more. It breaks my soul that I can't give like every single piece of information, but I would genuinely be here all day. Like, I have so many thoughts on this subject. It was actually getting overwhelming for me to reply to people on DMs. That's why I actually created the course, because I was like, I can't actually give everyone the information that I actually need them to have. So that's the whole reason why I wanted the course. When you asked me the question, I was like, no, so much information, so little time.
I think that is one thing that is very clear to me on all of your social channels, is that like, you're not putting courses together and creating these work things and all this stuff because you're trying to gatekeep this information. You're doing it because there's so much information. So much. You are actively trying to give it away left, right, and center. And if you've put a lot of work into creating these incredible resources, and so some of those resources are behind paywalls because you deserve to get paid for the work that you're doing, but you also give away so much information for free. So if you're looking for a place to start, we'll do a formal plug at the very end, but there's lots of information there.
Could you tell the TikTok trolls? Because I don't think they know.
Yeah. I'll go tell them. I'll do that after this. I'll go
so much.
Start tagging me in your shitty comments, and I'll just comment and be like, bad. You did bad.
I get so much hate for sometimes putting prices on stuff. And and then the funny thing is I get so much hate from my business. I have a business coach, and she goes mental at me for often charging things too low. I actually have gone on a long journey from giving away everything for free to trying to charge an amount that I think people can afford, but also means that I'm not destitute. And also that I think will get people to show up, because the reality is that creating change with dyslexia is complicated. There's not a silver bullet. It's not just download Grammarly and we're done. Like,
although that does help with a lot of
Grammarly's
things.
great. Yeah. No shade on Grammarly, but I think it's just one of those things that if it was simple, it wouldn't need to exist. If it was easy for me to explain, then I wouldn't have to do this in the first place. And so, yeah, what I realized sadly is that I can't solve the world through social media, but I am desperately trying if it's any help.
Doing a lot of good. A quick note on what people do not understand and never will because of the weirdness that is the internet is how much work goes into creating this education, that every person that you follow on social platforms that has a decent number of followers and creates content that you appreciate takes work. That work is incrementally more difficult when you are creating valuable education materials that is like has knowledge behind it and research and all of these other things, like the work that you create. And anybody that you follow for other reasons, like social justice reasons or other things, or things like dyslexia, where there is also emotional labor going into that, your expectation that that is free is skewed because so much of it has been free. I understand that there's a lot we can talk about in criticizing capitalism, but that's a different conversation. But by telling someone that their education should be free because it does good, you are implying that that person should do things at no cost and not be able to make a living off of the thing that they're doing because you want access to it, when you also deserve to make a living off of the massive amount of labor that you're putting in.
Well, Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I've come to terms with the TikTok trolls. They're a unique character of human. I think what and I wanted to write this huge explanation back to be like, no, but the reason why is and then I was like, nah, no.
Yeah, they're not going to hear it. Ugh. Well, the difficulty of disclosing something like this to anyone, it's something that I've thought about a lot because I have a lot of things about me that are hard for some people to share that I find really easy to share. It's very easy for me to talk about my mental health struggles and all of the things with that. That's something that I've been very loud about for a very long time. I realized that I was queer and then almost immediately came out on my podcast. It just was like, guys, I didn't know I was gay the whole time. That's an episode of my podcast. That was not easy for me to do, but easier than telling people that I'm dyslexic. Way more people in my life know that I have struggled with depression and anxiety and had full-fledged mental breakdowns and know a lot of details about me figuring out that I was queer. And very few people have I talked about the fact that I'm dyslexic with. It's interesting because all these things that you're talking about and all these preconceived notions around dyslexia, it's harder to explain. Because people think they know what it is and they're wrong.
I think you did the perfect job of explaining the reality, though. I think that just so neatly encapsulates the reality. One other story is a woman messaged me asking how to tell her husband of 30 years that she's dyslexic and she's scared. And I was like, okay, I don't feel equipped to do this, but I will help you nonetheless. So yeah, I think there's a lot of emotional baggage around dyslexia for sure.
So, like I said, we've been alluding to it the whole time. I think we've danced around a lot of these, but obviously dyslexic people are very cool and smart because we are very cool and smart. What are some things that are those strengths that you talk about?
Okay, so I have a passion about trying to explain dyslexic strengths to people in a way that just doesn't alienate dyslexic people, because I think sometimes the way we talk about it just is a little bit off-putting. It's a little bit irritating. And I think so often we either talk about dyslexia in terms of a superpower, which are just bleh. Or we talk about dyslexia in terms of celebrities, which no hate to those celebrities, but I just think we need to add more to the conversation. Like more needs to be done when we talk about real life people with real life jobs. And then the final thing that I want to say is that if you are naturally creative, like kudos to you. I am not. I am like stick men elude me. Like I don't have creativity like in my bones. My mum desperately argues otherwise, but she's the only one. And so if you are like sitting there and you're thinking, yep, stick men elude me too, and I'm dyslexic and I'm supposed to be creative, come join the party. You're not alone. There's many of us. So when we're going to try and talk about dyslexic strengths, I'm going to try and do all of those things at once. So bear with me if I fail. And what I thought could be fun, is we could just for a second do it where I try and help you understand your dyslexic strengths, because it's a real world example. So it fits the non-celebrity thing. We've talked enough about your challenges. So we're talking about dyslexia in a real way that isn't obnoxious. And we're not going anywhere near that nasty word that's superpower. And it's got real world tangible examples, which I think helps people understand stuff. So I think for me, that's how I try and help people understand what their dyslexic strengths are. So let's try and figure it out together. Okay. So do you know what they already are? Do you think you understand them? You genuinely really don't know.
Sincerely, like, I genuinely
I feel bad because I did not tell you I was going to do this, but I've been deciding I was going to do this for like over an hour.
I'm so excited.
Well, I mean, let's hope I do a good job. When you are thinking about what you're naturally really good at, that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking about dyslexic strengths. In your job, what are some of the things that you're like, you know what, it just seems to kind of flow. I don't find it very difficult.
Interestingly, thinking of what you mentioned with that project management piece and like going into that, that's a lot of the places where it's like my ability to zoom out and see the big picture and then figure out how we're going to get from here to there and like breaking that out into phases and steps and like do that is super easy for me. I know I've said it a million times, but my job, social media marketing, really what I do is strategy and like solving the puzzles of it.
Yeah, exactly. So that is a perfect example of dyslexic strengths. So if we go one step on from there, so we know dyslexic strengths is big picture thinking, and what you're saying there is that you're very good strategically. You can kind of pull in all the bits of the information of like, oh, I worked on this account and this really worked, and actually I had this conversation with this client and that makes me think that this could be connected to this, and actually I watched this video on like trends on social media, so I'm going to pull this in as well, and then I'm going to connect it all, smush it all together in my brain and come out with a strategy. So that's what we're thinking of when we're thinking of dyslexic strengths. Now, that's a really good start. Like, that's amazing. Most people don't even get to that stage very easily. But what the next stage is, if you're trying to figure out your dyslexic strengths, is you want real world examples where you're like, this specifically happened because of this skill. Because if you can't do that, the challenge is that you can specifically say, I wrote genitalia on a document in front of 16-year-olds and that was awful because I'm dyslexic. So what we have to be able to do with the challenges, we have to also be able to do with the strengths. So I'm hoping now you're going to give me an example. If not, I can try and tease one out.
It's funny because I do consulting, right? So I talk to a bunch of clients, and what you mentioned about like pulling a bunch of different pieces together and creating this larger piece. What I do, pull a bunch of social media data and I put it into these presentations, and I can look at these trends and I explain the trends of like how and why their social media is doing what it's doing. And I'm able to pull examples from a decade of doing this on social media and being like, here's all the reasons why this is moving the way it's moving. And when we'll go in and look at particular posts, and I'll be like, here's a bunch of maybes, and here's the trend that I'm seeing, and I'm seeing this happen and I'm able to notice and see that puzzle, what's affecting it, the way that it's affecting it. That's the reason people hire me.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I've got just a little like shivers down my spine. That was beautiful. So the thing that you probably hear, and if anyone is dyslexic here and they're thinking, this is kind of ringing a bell, but I don't want to accept it because I'm annoying like that, is the phrases that you want to like listen out for and remember and just clock that dyslexic people get all the time, and they just willfully ignore. Oh, that's so interesting, I didn't notice that. Or, that's so fascinating you spot that. I never would have thought about it that way. Do you know, you're so good at putting these things together. I just don't really see it like that. When we talk about the fact that we're using different parts of the brain to understand pieces of information, this is exactly what I was talking about when I say we see things differently. So where you were saying you're able to hark back to like a post you might have seen on your client's feed 2 months ago and be like, okay, we're talking about a trend, and then boop, like just straight away this post comes into your head, and then you're able to this really great example and being able to really bring to light the color and like the detail of this complicated story. This is all dyslexic strengths just shining through.
So happy. I can't explain. And I'm sure this is what you do with your coaching, right? Like what you said about you can give specific examples about dyslexia as a weakness. I've never thought about the fact that I understood that there were probably strengths, but I couldn't give tangible examples of it. And that, like, I'm not going to cry.
Do it. It'll make me feel
it's
so
a close thing. That was the best response I've ever gotten to telling someone to cry. It'll make you feel good if you cry.
And that was mean, but what I meant is that
No, it was beautiful and wonderful. I'm so happy.
I'm British. We're uncomfortable with emotion, so I had to make a joke. I can't, guys, I'm not American. I can't lean into emotion. Like I was uncomfortable. A joke was all you were getting. If you'd have actually cried, I would have died. So I think, what I was joking about and trying to regain some integrity that I'd hopefully built up throughout the podcast is that this is where I'm so happy that I decided to do this, because I think the problem when we talk about dyslexia as a superpower, dyslexia as something that is like a gift, or that we talk about celebrities, is we set the bar too high. And when we set the bar too high, like if you're thinking, okay, for me to have dyslexic strengths, I have to be Richard Branson and creating the next Virgin, or Steve Jobs creating the next iPhone, for anyone who doesn't know these people are dyslexic, then you instantly reach a bar that's uncomfortable for us as just like normal people to reach. But when we set the bar to just you, Lillian, creating copy, and you're like, oh, I'm really good at imagery with my copy. My copy always like has beautiful stories or pictures, or, you know, or it's a very simple way of explaining things. And we connect it to you as a real person. It's so reachable for other people. And that's why I am really passionate about discussing it in that way, because then people are more likely to be like, oh yeah, I suppose I do that. Rather than just being kind of unsure on what they are. So yeah, that is exactly what I do.
Well, and I loved those phrases that you brought up of like keeping an eye, because I think I'm hyper aware of the phrases when somebody is noticing my weaknesses from dyslexia. When somebody says, if somebody uses the word careless to describe me, it hurts more than anything else they could use to describe me. But I'm not aware and very dismissive, as you said, of those phrases that are pointing to a strength that is connected to that. So I think that's in and of itself, that's an incredibly powerful tool to give people.
I often say to people when we do coaching programs, I'm like, listen, to the compliments that people give to you, just note them down, send them over to me, and I will tell you how they're dyslexia. Like, you don't just write them down. You don't have to believe them. I will help you do the rest. And they're always some form of, you're so good at seeing things, or like, I never would have spotted that, or it's like, just, I love the way that you think about things. It's always some version of that.
Yeah.
And then we break down what exactly that is in that moment. Is it problem solving? Is it simplifying? Is it storytelling? Is it big picture thinking? Whatever. It's that that's the things of what kind of dyslexic strengths are, but we just, they're just a little too fluffy, unfortunately, that they're really hard to pull down into our everyday life. And that it appears to have become my calling in life, is to help people kind of pull them down from the up here, the ethereal, down to our day-to-day reality of like, in that moment, in that meeting, that exact like conversation was a dyslexic strength, and I'm signing that client and winning that contract because of it. Because if you can't know the strength, see the example, and bring the real world implications of it, you're just never going to truly feel like you understand your dyslexic strengths.
Oh, that's so incredible. Okay. Well, obviously this is going to be a 17-hour podcast, so buckle up, everybody. For people who are either just interested in learning more about dyslexia in general, or people who are dyslexic, what are different ways that people can, who are just starting to learn about this, access more information and learn more?
There's actually, like, hold the laughter for the irony, there's a lot of good books on dyslexia. You can listen to them as audiobooks.
Well, speaking of, just really quick, we'll go into what those books are. Whoever decided to call it dyslexia and put a Y in there was bullying specifically me. It's the meanest
thing. My beef
thing.
is with the I. The I just like floats around. I have a lot of, my actual biggest one is Brian and Brain. So just one last like common dyslexic challenge is this thing called homophones, which is basically just words that sound and look the same. So Angel and Angle, Brian and Brain, Manager and Manger, all of those, Dairy and Diary.
General and genital.
Exactly.
You know.
They are really common dyslexic challenges, and I write Brian all the time when I mean Brain, and it haunts me. I don't know where the I goes. And it's the same with dyslexia, just kind of like flop it about over the word and just see what happens.
Every time that I try to spell it, I always start with like a DYX, because I know that those 3 letters are in there. I'm like, that's not even close to how it should be spelled. Anyway, but the books that people are going to either read or listen to.
My favorite is Cheryl Isaac's Unleashing Your Limitless Power, which is all about adult dyslexia specifically, because no one else has just written about adult dyslexia. So that one would be probably my favorite. The Gift of Dyslexia is a big one.
And then for people who are obsessed with you now, which is probably everyone.
I'm going to make you cry thing.
No, I think because of the, it wasn't I'm going to make you cry. I said I'm going to cry, and you said, do it. It'll make me feel so good.
Hearing it back doesn't make it feel better.
It's the best thing anyone said to me. That's so funny.
I really hope that if anyone is American and listening to this audience, that you have just gotten an insight into British people and how deeply uncomfortable we are with emotion, and that is why I said that.
But also why I love British humor. So, people who are obsessed with you, in the I mean this, guys, nicest possible, least scary way, how can they stalk you on the internet?
There's a few options of now how you can stalk me on the internet. I'm on TikTok and Instagram under Dyslexia in Adults. And I'm also on LinkedIn under Natalie Brooks. And they're probably the 3 places to find me. There's a few more in the pipeline, but they're coming in short time. And if you want like more information on what I talked about, but for free, because I feel bad for the crying thing, I have an amazing download on what is dyslexia that is like really detailed, loads of information, and it's completely for free. So that would just be my recommendation if you want to just like dive in and get a little bit more.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. It has been such a joy to get to chat with you. It's so much, I love being able to talk to people about the thing that they're passionate about, but I think you do such a beautiful job of explaining this and understanding its nuances. And I think that's one of the really beautiful things about people who are teaching and helping and training on something that they also understand because they have the thing that I think is so often missing. And we could have talked about for an hour as well, that in and of itself. But I think you do that so beautifully. I'll stop making you uncomfortable with emotions and compliments. But anybody listening who wants more Care So Much can find us anywhere on the internet at Care So Much Pod. On all your socials, you can email caresomuchpod@gmail.com to tell me all of the reasons why you thought the general genital story was really, really funny. And if you're out there and there's something that you're really passionate about and you could talk about it for hours on end and you feel like nobody cares, just know that I do. I care so much.